You want to.
Well, as the last few people come in, I'd like to welcome you all here. Welcome to ODI. Welcome to this session today, Fragile States, the New Paradigm, Understanding State Fragility in the 21st Century. Before I go into a little bit of background in relation to why this session now, I have a couple of housekeeping things to do with you. First thing to say is, if you do hear an alarm bell, it is not a test. We haven't got one planned, so please do leave the room down the stairs out of the front door of the Institute. The second is conveniences, women's toilets over here, men's toilets around the corner over there. And the other thing to say is that the session today is being streamed on the internet. It's something we've been trying increasingly with our meetings. It means that people can actually sit in the comfort of their rooms and watch the session. It does also mean that things are on the record. It also means that we would ask you to speak into a microphone when you've got comments or questions. So please wait until you get a microphone before you participate. Period. But there are, for a whole number of poor countries and not so poor countries, where crisis is actually a fairly standard feature. And protracted crisis in particular is something that I think poses an acute challenge to the humanitarian and development community within the 21st century, which is how do we think about the prospect for international engagement and support in countries that are experiencing very extreme forms of fragility and or protracted crisis. And really that's the background to us wanting to launch this meeting and hopefully a subsequent meeting series in the autumn, looking at what this means for those of us working within the humanitarian and development fields. And to launch this off, we've got three terrific speakers, starting with Professor James Putzel here on my right. Many of you will know James's work, and if you don't, I suggest you hurry up and Google James, because there's an enormous amount he's contributed to our thinking about fragility and fragile states and the political economy of international engagement in fragile states. James is Professor of Development Studies at LSE, Destin, and also Director of the Crisis States Research Centre, and brings, I think, a particular perspective, which I hope will launch off a very lively discussion today about how we think about fragility, particularly in relation to the role of the state. And for many of us, of course, the role of the state is a fundamental issue in how we think about development. To my left, Sara Pantuliano, who is a program leader here in ODI within the humanitarian policy group. Sara is an expert on humanitarian action and policy in conflict and post-conflict environments. She leads a lot of our work in the Horn of Africa, particularly working in Sudan, is a specialist at looking at many of the programming challenges that humanitarian agencies are particularly faced with in dealing with situations of protracted crisis. Before coming to ODI, she headed up UNDP's peacebuilding unit in Sudan. And then on my far left here, Mark Robinson. Mark Robinson is currently head of profession for governance and conflict within DFID. He shares a position, he's also deputy director of DFID research. So there has a particularly, I think, unique position within the organization. Mark has within his portfolio much of the professional work going on, the advisory work going on within DFID on issues relating to state effectiveness, fragility, conflict. Prior to joining DFID, many of you will know Mark from being a research fellow at the Institute of Development Studies, where he led the governance team. He also spent a period at the Ford Foundation in India, leading a lot of their governance work, particularly with civil society organizations. And before that, way back somewhere, you were also at ODI, Mark, so welcome back. The format for today is that James is going to lead us off with a set of ideas around how we are thinking within development discourse about states and state fragility, how we might need to think again about our understandings of fragile states. And then I'm going to ask Sarah and Mark to reflect on some of those comments and maybe take them forward a little bit into, what does this all mean for the shifting paradigm, if you like, around security, development, humanitarian action? What do we need to be thinking about differently about development? What do we see the scope for international engagement as being? And where are the limits for that engagement? I don't know if any of you will have picked up on the fact that there was a major report that was published yesterday as a result of the National Security Commission. This was a commission hosted by IPPR, but the commission was co-chaired by Paddy Ashdown and George Robertson. And that report urges a very different approach for the UK in thinking about its security strategy, of putting a very new face on UK defence policy, thinking very differently about the UK's position and approach in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and also beginning to think differently about the role of particular government actors in supporting UK security strategy. It's quite a challenging document. Many of you might want to go and have a look at it, but I think it creates an interesting backdrop to our meeting today. James, I'm going to pass over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Alice.